Webinar on repository audit and certification catalogues. I am Katrin Beck from the RDA Europe training program team. Now let me present you our speaker. Dr. Ingrid Dillo holds a PhD in history and has worked in the field of policy development for the last 25 years, including as senior policy advisor at the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. Ingrid is now deputy director at DANS. Among her area of expertise are research data management and the certification of digital repositories. She is a member of the board of the Data Seal of Approval, the Technical Advisory Board of Research Data Alliance, and the board of directors of the Triad repository. She is also vice chair of the scientific committee of the ICSU World Data System, co-chair of the RDA WDS interest group on certification of digital repositories, and the RDA WDS interest group on cost recovery for data centers. Ingrid was an active member of the former RDA WDS repository audit certification partnership and participates in the research data expert group of the Knowledge Exchange. So let's start our webinar, Ingrid.
I was going to say is that in my talk, I will start with the importance of the concept of trust in the data world. Then I will continue with certification as a means to establish that trust and talk a little about the different standards that are available. And from there, I will zoom into the world of core or basic certification and the work that has been done recently within the framework of the Research Data Alliance. So I would like to start with a quote from a report from RDA, which was called the Data Harvest. And in that report, it is quoted that perhaps the biggest challenge in sharing data is trust. How do you create a system robust enough for scientists to trust that if they share, their data won't be lost, garbled, stolen, or misused? I think that is a key challenge that the RDA indeed faces. And of course, trust is at the very heart of storing and sharing research data. And this is so for all stakeholders involved and all for different reasons. The users of data from a digital repository have all kinds of questions like, have the data been preserved properly? Are they of high quality? Does the pointer get me to the right object? Depositors of data, of course, want to be sure that in these digital repositories, their data are safe and remain accessible and usable and meaningful over time. And finally, the funders, they of course want the reassurance that their investment in the production of valuable research data is not wasted, but will remain also in the future. So reuse of data will give them, of course, a higher return on their investment. So all stakeholders are involved in the issue of trust, you could say. So what is trust built on? I think that the basic pillars of trust are quite generic and they are applicable in all kinds of relationships, both private and professional. You need to dedicate yourself. So for an organization, that means that you need to have a clear mission statement. You need, of course, to do what you promise to do. You need to be stable and you need to have a sincere and competent reputation. And of course, you also need to be transparent in order to be trustworthy. So for an organization, this might mean that you go through peer review, that you get certified. With respect to that transparency, I very much like a statement that is on the website of the UK Data Service, UK Data Archive. And it says, any organization which provides access to data over a long period of time should be fully trusted only with a public statement describing the practices they follow and the provenance of data they provide. Standards of trust are critical. So if you look at the building blocks of trustworthiness, on the one hand, this has all to do with the actions of and the attributes of the trustee himself. So that deals with integrity, with your transparency, the competence, your predictability, the guarantees that you give, and all kinds of positive intentions that you might have. But there is another building block in this trustworthiness, and that is the external acknowledgement of that trustworthiness. And this external acknowledgement can be the reputation that you have. And I think the reputation of a repository among peers is a very important factor for researchers in their choice of a repository. Other third-party endorsements, for example, certification, I think is not so much of interest for the individual researcher. I don't think a researcher will look for a repository to deposit their data on the basis of a repository having a certification, yes or no. But I think for funders and, for example, for publishers, this indeed is a very important instrument to determine whether a repository will give them the necessary reassurance that the data will be there for a long period of time. And I will put out my Outlook because that is bothering you. Okay. So certification is important, and standards can play an important role in establishing trust. And there has long been a demand for some way to evaluate and to assess the trustworthiness of a digital repository. And over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, a number of evaluation guidelines have become available. And these standards not only take into account, let's say, the technical infrastructure and the standards, but they also look at all kinds of organizational aspects, financing, staffing, legal aspects, workflows in archives, risk management, etc., etc. So there is really there are really a lot of aspects that certification deals with. And here you see 3 standards that are available at the moment: ISO, Nestor, and the Data Seal of Approval. And I will go deeper into all 3 of them. Oops, that's one too far. So here we are. Here you see a framework of different certification levels as it has been developed within Europe. This framework consists, you could say, of 3 different levels. And at the basis of this framework, we find so-called core certification. And core certification within the European context is granted to repositories that obtain the Data Seal of Approval. Above that basic layer is the layer of the extended certification. And an extended certification is granted to repositories that have their certification based on the DIN standard, the DIN 31644 standard, also called the Nestor seal. And I will talk about all of these certifications later on. And the highest level in this European framework is the formal certification. And that formal certification would be granted to repositories that obtain the certification based on ISO 16363, which also entails a full external audit. So this is a kind of the stairs that you can climb up as a repository in order to go through to get your organization or your repository certified. That once was the idea of the European framework, and we tried to more or less align these 3 standards. And at a certain point in time, there was also some backing and some funding from the European Commission to get this framework up and running. But I think the picture is broader than the European picture. And here you see a graph that represents this broader global framework. You see a pyramid with, again, at the top, the ISO standard, below, so the formal level, below the extended level with the Nestor seal or the DIN. That's one and the same thing. I'll talk about that later on. And on the core level, you see again the data seal of approval, but you see appearing another certification standard as well, and that is the certification that is managed by the ICSU World Data System. So two different standards on that same core level. Now, I will now go into the main characteristics of these different certification standards. So first of all, the data seal of approval. The data seal of approval is an initiative of my organization, of DANS. And we started out in this endeavor around 2006, I think. DANS started off as an institute in 2005 and got the task to think about certain requirements that should be met in order to provide a good service for our own institution, but also for others. And from that, the data seal of approval came forward. It is a very basic and lightweight standard. It has 16 guidelines for trustworthy digital repositories, and it's based on a self-assessment done by the repository itself, and there are no external auditors or site visits involved. This self-assessment is peer-reviewed, and this peer-review process is supervised by the International Board of the Data Seal of Approval. For this whole self-assessment and review process, an online tool is available on the web in order to facilitate all the work. And once you get your, you acquire your seal, the seal is granted up till now for a period of 2 years. So that means that after 2 years, you need to renew your seal and go through the same procedure again. It is a very open and transparent and inclusive endeavor. And it also means that if you get your data seal of approval, the self-assessment is made publicly available on the website of DSA. So everyone interested in your repository can have a look at how you have organized things in the different aspects. The data seal of approval has a focus on social sciences and humanities, and this is for historic reasons. As I told you, DSA started off in DANS, and DANS has a strong focus in these areas. So it's evident that the expansion was first mainly in the social sciences and humanities. DSA has a strong emphasis on Europe, and this has to do with the fact that a number of European research infrastructures have adopted the data seal of approval as one of the requirements for data repositories to be part of their research infrastructures. So this is the case with the infrastructures in the social sciences like CESTA, but also for Clarin, DARIA, and the more generic EUDAT. At the moment, around 65 seals have been acquired by repositories around the world. So this is a short introduction into the data seal of approval. Now let's move on to the World Data System. The World Data System is part of a larger international organization of the science unions. And the World Data System also uses a lightweight certification procedure for organizations that want to become a regular or a network member of their organization. And this certification procedure is also based on a self-assessment that is then peer-reviewed by the scientific committee of the WDS. The focus of WDS is mainly on the Earth and spatial sciences, and WDS is a true global organization with also many members in the US, for example, and in Asia. The renewal period of a certification within WDS is slightly longer than with DSA. Here it is somewhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on the state of affairs within the repository. And around 70 members within WDS have been accredited according to this system up till now. So these two standards These two catalogues of requirements are available as a core level certification for data for digital repositories. If you go up the ladder, you encounter the DIN 31644 certification standard. And this standard is a little bit more elaborate. It contains 34 criteria, and it has been an initiative by a German group called Nestor that consists of musea, libraries, and archives. And in Germany, it has been adopted as the DIN 31644, which is a formal certification body in Germany, DIN. Again, the procedure around the Nestor seal is based on a self-assessment that is led by Nestor, and this self-assessment here as well is peer-reviewed by two reviewers that are appointed by the Nestor organization. And here as well, if your self-assessment is approved, the evidence that you have provided is made available on the website of Nestor. At the moment, the seal and the whole procedure is up and running, but up till now, only 2 seals have been acquired by my own organization and by the National Library of Germany. So there are not yet many seal holders on this level. And then finally, we move up to the top of the certification pyramid, and there we find the formal ISO 16363 standard for certification of digital repositories. And this standard is very much based on the OAIS reference model, and is also based on all the work that has been done earlier in TRAC, the Trusted Repository Audit and Certification Initiative. And the ISO standard is really very elaborate. It contains over 100 metrics that you need to comply with. So this is really an arduous work if an organization wants to go for this ISO standards. The, let's say the draft standard was tested in 2011, and that those tests were there was oversight by the so-called PTAB, the Primary Trustworthy Digital Repository Authorization Body. These 6 test audits, 3 of them were done in Europe and 3 in the US. And the outcomes of these tests were, of course, very important to finalize the actual ISO standard. If you go for this standard, you will also need to go through a full external auditing process, which means that you will get a committee inside the walls of your building that will look over the shoulders of the people in the office to see how everything works. So they will really be on the work floor. And to organize this whole and to facilitate this whole process, there is a separate ISO standard that defines the requirements for bodies that provide audit and certification of candidate trustworthy digital repositories. This standard is now available, but the whole organizational framework around this has to be taken care of on a national basis. And I know that in the US, but I think also in the UK and in the Netherlands, work is being done in that area. But up till now, it's not up and running in any country. So there are not yet official certifications done based on this ISO standard. Although there are organizations that are doing this already, but that's on an informal basis. So that means that if you take the whole bunch into account, that only at core level there is already a certain body of certified repositories available at the moment. And I would like to move back now to this core level and tell you a little bit more about the work that we have done within the context of RDA. Because as you will have noticed, the data seal of approval and the World Data System certification very much look alike. There are a lot of commonalities. They are both lightweight standards. They are based on community review. And there is also a lot of complementarity in geographical spread, with DSA having a focus in Europe and the WDS also in the US and Asia. And there is a disciplinary spread, with DSA having a focus on the social sciences and humanities, and WDS more in the earth and spatial sciences. So because of the fact that the two standards looked so alike, and the fact that we ran into each other more or less under the umbrella of the Research Data Alliance, led to a nice initiative. As you will probably know, the Research Data Alliance is a very international and bottom-up organization focused on enabling the open sharing of research data. And there are all kinds of working groups and interest groups working under the umbrella of RDA on a large variety of topics. So we set up a working group that consisted both of representatives from DSA as well as WDS to explore a possible partnership. And we worked together for a bit over 1.5 years. Why did we do that? We thought that there were a lot of possibilities to realize efficiencies, because we were doing more or less the same work from two different angles. We also wanted to simplify the certification landscape, to simplify the assessment options, because it's difficult to explain to an outsider why there is a DSA next to a WDS. And finally, we wanted to have more impact, to stimulate more certifications. And we thought that the best way to do that, to achieve that, would be to work together. So what did we achieve under the umbrella of RDA in this working group? We came up with 3 important outcomes, I think. The first one being a common catalogue of requirements for core level repository assessment. So we tried to bring together the best of both worlds, so to say. We compared the catalogues of requirements, and from that came up with a new set of requirements. Next to that, we tried to align our procedures. And finally, as part of this working group, we run a shared testbed to test our new common requirements. So 3 pieces of outcome, and I would like to tell a little bit more about all of them. So first of all, these new common requirements, they deal with, and you can see the figures behind the different categories are the number of requirements. And I see now that there is a mistake in the slides, but I'll come to that. So there is one requirement that deals with the context of the repository. Then there are a number of requirements dealing with the organizational infrastructure, so the broader perspective. Then 8 on the digital object management, 2 on technology, and finally 1 instead of 2, as it states here, which gives the applicant the possibility to add information or to give feedback on the requirements themselves. What we also have in the catalog is the possibility to define your level of compliance for each requirement. And you can see the different levels here. 0 meaning this requirement is not applicable for me. 1, we haven't considered this yet. 2, we have a theoretical concept. 3, it's in the implementation phase but not finished yet. And 4, the guideline or the requirement has been fully implemented in the repository. And we think this is very important. You are not judged by your scoring, and you score yourself. You are judged by the text that you provide us and the evidence that you provide us. But still, we think it's very important to rate your maturity, your compliance level for the different requirements. And this is meant to foster your own understanding of the maturity of your repository, and it also gives the possibility to use it as a kind of benchmark also for organizations that are not yet at the level at which they would say, well, we will go for a formal certification. It gives you an idea of where you can identify the gaps, and you can also identify where you are doing very well. So it's a kind of maturity test, which we think is very important and can also be very helpful for organizations that in the end will not or not yet go for a submission of their self-assessment. So going back to the different requirements, the first one is about context. So there you are asked to describe the type of your repository. Is it disciplinary, national? Is it part of a larger organization, etc., etc.? You also need to provide a brief description of the repository's designated community, the level or levels of curation that you perform, and you can also make clear that you perhaps have partners to which you outsource part of the work that you do. This is possible within the certification, but it of course means that these outsourcing partners need to comply with the requirements that apply to the work that they do. So there needs to be a solid SLA for that as well. Then the first chunk of requirements deal with your organizational infrastructure. And I will not go through them in detail, but just give you a quick glance of it. So you need to have an explicit mission to provide access and preserve data. You need to give information on the licensing that you provide. You need to have a continuity plan to ensure ongoing access to and preservation of your holdings. I mean, this is the whole essence of a long-term repository. You need to show that you work in compliance with your disciplinary and ethical norms. You need to show that you have adequate and long-term funding, that you have sufficient numbers of qualified staff, and that you make use in some form of expert guidance for your repository. Then there are a number of requirements that deal more closely with digital object management. And here you are dealing with the integrity and authenticity of your holdings, of the data. You need to define, you need to have defined criteria to make sure that your data are relevant and understandable for your data users. And this not also counts for your data, but also your metadata. You need to show that you apply documented processes and procedures in managing your archival storage. And of course, you need to assume long-term responsibility. So you need to show how you have organized and planned your long-term preservation. What you also need to do is you need to have expertise in-house to address all the technical data and metadata quality issues. You need to have defined workflows in your archive, ranging from the ingest to the dissemination of the data. You need to have, you need to enable the users to discover, of course, the data, but also to refer to them in a persistent way. So you need to have persistent identifiers. And you also need to provide appropriate metadata by which the users can understand and use the data that you have in your holdings. Then there are two guidelines, two requirements that deal with your technical infrastructure, that look at your operating systems and other core infrastructural software. And then there is one that deals with security, the protection, and that deals not only with your technical infrastructure, but also with your facility. It's much broader, the facility itself, and even your users and the services, etc., etc. So this is a very broad and generic requirement. So these are the 16 guidelines. And here you see one page, just to give you an example. I think it's not readable on your screens just as it isn't on mine, but it gives you an idea of what the catalog looks like. Here you see one requirement, and there is a box for your compliance level, there is a box for your response, and then there is additional guidance text that explains the one sentence requirement a bit further. It also suggests pieces of evidence that you could provide in order to comply with this requirement. And it also suggests a number of questions that you could answer in the context of the requirement. And finally, it also makes connections to other requirements that have relations with this requirement. So there is a lot of guidance to help you construct your response to the requirement. Now, these requirements, so this is the first product that came out of the RDA working group of DSA and WDS, has been published at the end of last year. Here you see the announcement that was placed on the RDA website, and below you see two URLs that lead you to the news on both the Datasheet of Approval side as well as the WDS side. So this catalog is now available and it's up and running. So anyone can now go and submit a self-assessment also in the online tools. Now I'd like to move on to the second piece of work that we dealt with in this working group, and that had all to do with, let's say, aligning the procedures around this catalog. And here you see a couple of elements that we touched upon and agreed upon. So one of the things is that we really want people, when they fill out their self-assessment, to come up with evidence, and preferably evidence that is available on the internet. I talked a little bit already about the maturity ratings, the compliance levels that we strongly advocate. I also already talked about the fact that the assessments will be made publicly available once the certification is acquired. And this not necessarily means that all of the information and let's say, the background information should be available for anyone on the web. We perfectly well understand that there might be sensitive material among this, and of course that does not have to be available publicly, but we really want the public access to be the default situation. Of course, exceptions are possible. At the moment, we're in a kind of transition phase. So if you now submit a self-assessment, you will get both the DSA and the WDS certification. But we are in the middle of bringing these two together as well, and coming up with a new brand with a new combined seal. And we hope to do that over the next. Hopefully, we will have something over summer, but maybe a bit longer. But anyway, this year we will have a brand new seal that will come with this new catalog of requirements. We also talked about the renewal period, and we decided upon a renewal period of 3 years. So if you get your seal in 2017, that will mean that you need to go through the motion again in 2020. We also looked at the review process, and we are now pulling together a group of reviewers, and they are also trained in the new catalog that are drawn from both sides, from DSA and WDS. So any self-assessment that now enters the system will be looked at by a reviewer from DSA and a reviewer from WDS, because we want to build, let's say, a common culture as well when it comes to reviewing and assessing the documents that we get from repositories. And like I said, we are now in the process of setting up also mutual governance. So DSA and WDS work on implementing and stewarding the partnership even further than it is now. That on the common procedures, and then finally the testbed. We ran this testbed at the second half of last year, and in this testbed we had 6 guinea pigs, not 5 as you see here on the screen. We had 6 in practice, 2 DSA applicants, and 4 applicants from the world of WDS. And I must say, so they used the new catalogue and went through the procedure, and overall the results were quite positive. People really believe that we took the best of both worlds and came up with something better than we had before. The catalogue seems to be better structured. There also seems to be less overlap between the different requirements, which makes the world a lot clearer. The guidance seems to be clearer as well. And people had the feeling that there were good references between the different requirements. That also helps you going through everything. So, of course, there were also other remarks. Some things were not completely evident and not completely clear. So we tweaked the catalogue after these test beds on the basis of the results. So finally, 2 slides on why we do all of this. First of all, something from my own perspective. Why do we do so much in this area at DANS? On the one hand, I really believe that certification provides you an instrument to build trust in your repository with your depositors and users of data, but even more, I think, with partner organizations and with funders of research, because for them, this is a good instrument to assess a repository. But even more than this external reason, for me, there is a very important internal reason to work on processes like this, because it offers you, let's say, a kind of big stick to further develop and professionalize your core services, your workflows, and even your organization as a whole. Because a lot of the things that you need to deal with in a certification process are usually not the things that are on the top of the overall organizational priority list. So it helps you to get things moving and to professionalize also in the back office of your organization. And on this slide, you see a number of benefits and added values of core certification that have been identified by DSA seal holders. And among them, again, are the building of stakeholder confidence in the repository. It improves internal communication within the repository because you deal with so many aspects of the organization. You need to sit together and talk about that. It improves your repository processes and ensures transparency, since all the information becomes available for others as well. It's also a possibility, of course, to differentiate your repository from other repositories. And really, starting at the core level saves time and also labor over other certification methods. And what you need to keep in mind is that if you go through a core certification process, all the work that you do there is not lost when you go to the second level, because everything that you have already in order is usable for the next level. What we also see in practice, we have asked last year all DSA seal holders whether they would be interested to go a step beyond, so go for NESTRA or for ISO. And there you see that almost no one is thinking about that. Most repositories stay at this core level and find that adequate for their mission and the tasks that they need to perform. So I think with that, I would like to end my talk. I hope it was audible for all of you. It wasn't too soft. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.